Hello dear YouTube viewers, I hope you're doing well. Let's start our video. The dining room glowed with soft light, laughter mingling with the clinking of cutlery and plates. The table stretched long, crowded with dishes of roasted chicken, steaming vegetables, and fresh bread still warm from the oven. Family filled the seats, siblings sharing inside jokes, cousins whispering about school, parents exchanging knowing glances. It was the kind of gathering that appeared ordinary to anyone looking from the outside. But to me, the air carried a quiet charge, a weight I couldn't shake off. I sat close to my wife, her hand resting lightly on her lap, her smile polite, but thinner than usual. Something about her seemed distant, as though she were here in body, but elsewhere in thought. I tried brushing it aside, telling myself it was just another family dinner, just another night of routine togetherness. Yet the unease lingered, pricking at me like a splinter beneath the skin. As the plates made their way around and conversation shifted to light-hearted stories, I leaned slightly toward her, lowering my voice just enough for those around us to hear, without straining. "Darling," I said softly, my words carrying a warmth I wanted to feel myself. "How about some wine?" Her eyes flicked toward mine, and for the briefest moment, I caught hesitation flickering there. Then, with a small shake of her head and a voice calm but guarded, she replied, "No, dear, I'm not drinking tonight." The words landed on the table like a dropped fork. A few relatives looked up, others continued chewing, but the change in atmosphere was undeniable. Something unspoken had surfaced. For a moment, the sound of laughter and cutlery softened, as though the room itself had paused. My wife's words, simple as they were, seemed to hang above the table. Across from us, my sister raised an eyebrow, her expression sharp with curiosity before she quickly masked it with a sip of water. My mother glanced from me to my wife with that subtle, knowing look she always wore when she sensed something wasn't being said aloud. A cousin leaned toward his brother, whispering something with a smirk that vanished as soon as I caught his eye. Others pretended not to notice at all, continuing their conversations about work, school, and tomorrow's plans. The clatter of plates returned, but underneath it all, I felt a different rhythm, the quiet hum of speculation. I turned toward my wife, hoping for a smile, a glance, some small reassurance. But her gaze stayed fixed on her plate, her fork pushing gently at the edge of her food, without ever lifting it. She kept her posture perfect, her face calm, yet her eyes avoided mine, as though contact might reveal too much. Suspicion began to coil in my chest, a quiet unease. Still, I forced myself to join in the light chatter, laughing at a half-hearted joke from across the table, wearing the mask of ease even as doubt pressed closer. Earlier that day, before the clinking of glasses and the warm hum of voices filled the dining room, I had noticed something different in her. It began in the quiet of our bedroom, the late afternoon sun spilling across the carpet. She stood at the mirror longer than usual, smoothing her dress again and again as though it never quite sat right. Her hands lingered on her necklace, adjusting it twice, then thrice, before finally letting it rest against her collarbone. I remember watching her, leaning against the doorway, amused at first. She had always been someone who carried herself with elegance, but this time there was an edge to her movements, a nervousness tucked into the folds of her routine. Her phone buzzed on the dresser, and I noticed the way she picked it up quickly, almost protectively. She read the screen in silence, her lips pressing together before she set it face down, as if hiding something from both of us. "Everything all right?" I asked lightly, not wanting to intrude, only half aware of the shadows flickering beneath her calm. She smiled, small and unconvincing. "Just work," she said, smoothing the hem of her dress once more. I chose to believe her. I convinced myself the tightness in her smile was nothing more than exhaustion, the constant pull of responsibility. After all, we had a dinner to attend, and I didn't want to weigh the evening down with questions. Yet now, sitting at the table with her refusal still echoing in my ears, that memory returned in sharper focus. I realized I had seen the storm in her eyes hours ago. I had only chosen to look away. Wine had always been more than just a drink at our family gatherings. It was a ritual, almost sacred in its familiarity. The bottle would be uncorked with a flourish, glasses filled and raised as a sign that the evening had truly begun. My father used to say that wine softened the edges of conversation, making laughter louder, stories longer, and hearts warmer. Over the years, the tradition had become second nature, so deeply woven into our dinners that to refuse a glass was to disturb the rhythm everyone expected. My wife had always been part of that rhythm. She enjoyed the ritual as much as the rest of us, often the first to lift her glass with a playful grin, teasing whoever was slow to follow. She had a favorite, a smooth red that she claimed made even ordinary evenings feel like celebrations. That was why her refusal struck harder than her simple word should have. It wasn't just that she said no. It was that she stepped outside a tradition that had always been hers to enjoy. A cousin chuckled lightly, saying, "Not drinking tonight? That's a first." Someone else added, joking, "Saving it all for dessert?" The laughter was easy, but it didn't carry far. Beneath the surface, the tension hummed. I forced a smile, nodding along with their banter, but in my chest I felt the weight of her answer. In a family bound by routine, even the smallest disruption had the power to ripple into something larger. She sat there with her hands neatly folded at first, but the calm didn't last. Before long, her fingers began whirring the edge of her napkin, twisting it, smoothing it, then twisting it again. Every so often, she lifted her glass of water, taking small, careful sips as though it were a shield. Her eyes avoided mine, drifting instead to the candle in the center of the table or the plate in front of her. When someone at the far end of the table called her name, she answered quickly, too quickly, her laugh coming out just a shade too thin. I studied her quietly, forcing my own face to remain pleasant, but inside my thoughts stirred like restless waves. What was she hiding from me? 1,000 possibilities crowded my mind. Was she angry with me, nursing some hurt I hadn't seen? Or was she guilty of something far more unsettling, something she dared not confess in front of the family? And then, the thought that stopped me cold. Could she be pregnant? That would explain the careful way she avoided the wine, the secretive glances at her phone, the nervousness tucked inside her every move. The idea carried both hope and fear. Hope for what it might mean. Fear because she hadn't told me herself. I smiled when she looked my way, though the smile felt heavy. Beneath the surface of my affection for her, doubt pulsed, steady and unrelenting, refusing to let me rest. It was my brother-in-law who broke the silence that had started to settle like an unwelcome guest at the table. With his usual booming voice, he launched into a ridiculous story about a mishap at the hardware store. Something about buying nails only to realize later they were the wrong size for every project he had planned. The timing was deliberate. He had a way of sensing when tension threatened to spoil a meal, and he never missed a chance to cover it with humor. Laughter rippled around the table, the kind that felt just a little too loud, a little too eager, as though everyone wanted to believe nothing was amiss. Plates were passed again, fresh servings offered, and the conversation veered back toward safer ground. Work anecdotes, vacation plans, neighborhood gossip. On the surface, everything looked as it should. A family sharing a warm dinner, voices overlapping, forks scraping plates. But I could not let go of the image of her twisting that napkin, her voice too light, her smile too rehearsed. I forced myself to nod along, even joining in the laughter, but my attention never drifted far from her. Every movement of her hands, every glance she gave, or refused to give, pulled at me. Rather than confront her, I chose silence. I decided I would keep watching, quietly, carefully, until the truth revealed itself. Outwardly, I wore the same mask of normalcy as everyone else, but inside, the questions refused to settle. Something was waiting beneath her calm, and I intended to see it. Partway through the meal, just as dessert plates were being set out, her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't reach for it cautiously. She stood, almost too quickly, and murmured, "Excuse me for a moment." She slipped her phone into her hand and left the table with a practiced smile, moving toward the hallway. No one else seemed to notice, too busy discussing the merits of chocolate cake versus apple pie. But my eyes followed her every step. My chest tightened as the door swung lightly behind her, muffling her voice, but not completely. I caught fragments carried back through the narrow corridor. Not now, later. I can't talk here. Her words were sharp, whispered with urgency. The sound of them struck me harder than I wanted to admit. My fork lay forgotten on my plate, as the air in the room seemed suddenly thinner. Who was she talking to? Why the secrecy? A colleague? A friend? Something darker? My thoughts leapt ahead of reason, each possibility cutting deeper than the last. I forced myself to look back at the table, to smile as my mother offered me another slice of cake I barely tasted. But inside, my stomach coiled tighter, a knot refusing to loosen. The room had grown noisier, yet I felt trapped in silence, caught between what I had heard and what I feared it meant. When she returned a few minutes later, her face was composed, her smile brighter than before. Too bright, and in that brightness, I saw the first true crack in her mask. As she returned to her seat, her smile perfectly in place, my mind drifted back over the years we had shared. I remembered the first time I saw her, the way her laugh had filled the room and made every other sound fade away. We had fallen in love with a recklessness that felt endless, trusting each other with our dreams, our fears, our small insecurities. We promised to face life together, to weather storms side by side, and to never keep secrets that could break the fragile bond we had built. There were times when trust had been tested, long nights apart when work and responsibilities pulled us in different directions, arguments over money, misunderstandings that threatened to unravel everything. Yet each time, we had chosen to hold on to one another, to speak through the doubt and reaffirm the commitment that had brought us together. Now, sitting across from her, watching the careful way she avoided eye contact and sidestepped my questions, I felt that old trust waver. Had I misread the signs of our happiness? Was she betraying the promises we had made in whispered conversations under the covers late at night, when the world outside had no bearing on the small, sacred universe we shared? Or was it something else entirely? Something she kept close to her chest, because she feared my reaction more than anything else? My heart wanted to believe in her, to cling to the foundation we had built, but my mind was filled with questions that refused to settle. I realized then that trust, though strong, was fragile, and love, though enduring, could not shield me from doubt when the smallest shadow of secrecy crept into its warmth. The evening stretched on, each clatter of cutlery and quiet laugh, reminder that beneath the familiar, something unspoken was waiting to reveal itself. Even as I tried to focus on the conversation, I noticed subtle movements around the table. My cousins leaned toward one another, whispering just loud enough for me to catch a word or two. Their glances darted repeatedly in our direction, and though they smiled politely when addressed, their eyes betrayed curiosity, an unspoken acknowledgment that something was amiss. My mother, sitting at the head of the table, caught my gaze and held it for a moment. Her expression was unreadable at first, then softened into that knowing look she always gave when she sensed more than what was spoken. She said nothing, though, no question, no comment, just the quiet weight of her awareness pressing into me. Around the table, laughter and conversation continued, but the edges were sharper, tinged with tension. The gentle clatter of forks and plates seemed louder than before, each sound accentuating the silent scrutiny of family members who sensed a fissure in our evening. I felt it keenly, the pressure of private matters bleeding into the public space. Every movement of my wife, every careful word, felt magnified under the invisible eyes of those around us. The room, once warm and familiar, now seemed to constrict slightly with judgment that was never spoken aloud but keenly felt. I forced a polite smile, lifting my glass in response to a toast, but my mind remained tethered to her. Whatever she was hiding, the whole table seemed to sense its presence, and I was caught between loyalty, suspicion, and the weight of family observation. She returned to the table with a smile that was just a little too wide, just a little too bright, as if she were trying to illuminate the tension around her. She eased back into her chair, placing her hands neatly in her lap, and spoke in a voice that was steady, controlled. "I'm fine," she said, almost cheerfully, "just not in the mood to drink tonight." Her words hung in the air, polite but heavy with something unsaid. I nodded, offering a small smile, but inside, a question churned relentlessly. What was she hiding? I decided to test the waters gently, asking casual questions about her day, about work, even about the errands she'd run before dinner. Each time, she replied with practiced neutrality, her answers polite but deflective, never lingering long enough to give me a real glimpse into her mind. I noticed the way her fingers twitched against the tablecloth when I asked about her morning, how she avoided my gaze when I mentioned something mundane about the neighbors. Everything was outwardly normal, yet the smallest gestures betrayed a tension she could not entirely hide. I realized then that the confrontation I had feared was already underway, but silent, veiled, hidden beneath smiles and laughter. The dinner continued around us, the family oblivious to the quiet storm brewing at our end of the table. I let her words settle, letting her maintain her composure, but my mind remained alert, searching for the truth beneath the calm exterior. Each glance, each shift of her hand, became a small clue in the puzzle I was desperate to solve. Dessert had just arrived, plates of chocolate cake and apple pie, the aroma sweet and comforting. When it happened, she reached for her water, a small, clear glass, but her hand trembled ever so slightly. In a heartbeat, the glass tipped, spilling cool liquid across the tablecloth. Napkins were flurried into action by cousins and sisters alike, but in that chaotic motion, something else happened. A small envelope, hidden in the folds of her purse at her side, slipped free and fluttered to the floor. No one noticed it at first, too busy dabbing at the spreading water or laughing nervously at the clumsiness. But my eyes caught it immediately, and my heart skipped a beat. She bent quickly to retrieve it, but in that brief movement, I had already scooped it up. The envelope was light, almost fragile, with her handwriting on the front, neat, familiar, intimate. I didn't open it in front of anyone. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the rapid drum of my pulse echoing in my ears. Once the room returned to a semblance of order, I slid it across the table toward myself, carefully unfolding the contents. Inside was a folded medical paper, the kind that carried news no one shared lightly. The words on it made my stomach lurch, and for a long moment, I could hardly breathe. Everyone else continued talking, unaware, laughing at something trivial, but my world had shifted. The slip of a glass, the casual movement of a purse, had revealed the hidden truth she had been guarding so carefully. Shock, disbelief, and an urgent need to understand raced through me, my heartbeat hammering in my ears as I stared at the paper in stunned silence. I slid the envelope quietly into my hand, my fingers tightening around it as I met her eyes across the table. Her smile faltered for the briefest moment, just enough for me to see the flicker of something hidden, fear, hesitation, perhaps guilt. I nodded subtly toward the hallway, and she understood without a word. Excusing ourselves from the murmurs and laughter at the table, we moved together into the quieter space, the soft click of the dining room door closing behind us amplifying the tension between us. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit, and heavy with the unspoken. I held the envelope tightly, aware of every shallow breath, every shift in her posture. She avoided my gaze at first, staring at the floor as though the carpet held the answers she could not voice. I reached out, lightly touching her arm, and her eyes finally met mine, wide, vulnerable, searching for reassurance that I wasn't angry, only desperate for truth. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly, the words more a plea than an accusation. She hesitated, trembling slightly, as if weighing each word before releasing it. Then finally she exhaled, a fragile sound that seemed to release all the tension she had been holding. "I was scared," she admitted. "I wasn't sure if the timing was right. I didn't know how you'd react." Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything she had been holding back. The envelope rested between us, a tangible symbol of the secret she had carried alone. In that heavy, intimate moment, all the tension, suspicion, and fear of the evening crystallized into understanding, into the first fragile step toward truth. Her voice wavered as she finally spoke, the words trembling in the quiet hallway. I'm pregnant," she admitted, her eyes searching mine for a reaction, for reassurance, for anything that would tell her it was safe to breathe again. The admission hung in the air, heavy and fragile, and for a moment I could say nothing. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding, shock, disbelief, relief, and a tenderness that seemed to rise from the depths of my chest. All the suspicion, all the questions that had haunted me since dinner began, dissolved in that single, simple revelation. She bit her lip nervously, as though the confession itself might shatter the fragile balance of the moment. "I was scared," she continued softly. "I didn't know if it was the right time. I didn't know if you were ready. I didn't want to say anything and risk ruining what we have." Her hands twisted together, clutching at the fabric of her dress, as though holding herself steady was the only way to keep her fears from spilling over. I stepped closer, placing my hand over hers, feeling the warmth and the subtle tremor that had betrayed her anxiety for hours. My voice finally found its way through the silence. It's wonderful," I said, letting the words settle into the space between us. "We'll figure it out together." Relief washed over her face, softening the tension in her shoulders. The fear that had clouded the evening began to lift, replaced by a quiet tenderness. In that moment, all the uncertainty melted away, leaving only the promise of new beginnings and the shared heartbeat of a life that was about to change forever. Hand in hand, we returned to the table, our fingers intertwined in a quiet reassurance that spoke louder than words. The family paused mid-conversation, noticing the subtle change in our demeanor. My mother's eyes widened slightly, my siblings exchanged curious glances, and even the cousins who had been whispering earlier straightened at attention. The atmosphere shifted instantly, the lingering tension replaced by anticipation. I took a deep breath, feeling her squeeze my hand as if giving me courage. "There's something we want to share," I began, my voice steady despite the rapid beat of my heart. She smiled at me, a soft, nervous expression, and nodded. "We're expecting a baby," she said, her voice brightening as the words finally left her lips. For a moment, silence hung over the table as the news sank in. Then, like a dam breaking, reactions erupted. My mother gasped, her hands flying to her face before tears of joy welled up in her eyes. My sister shrieked softly, covering her mouth with both hands, then laughed in disbelief and happiness. Cousins leaned forward, offering hugs and congratulatory pats, some joking, others just beaming. Even my father, usually reserved, allowed a broad smile to spread across his face, his eyes glistening. The air around us seemed to glow, the warmth of the family's embrace blending with our own relief and excitement. Laughter and chatter resumed, this time lighter, freer, infused with joy rather than unease. In that moment, the tension that had shadowed the evening melted completely, replaced by the shared happiness of new beginnings. It was a quiet, cathartic victory, one that bound us closer to each other and to the family that would now celebrate the life we were about to bring into the world. The evening that had begun with subtle unease and unanswered questions had transformed into something entirely different, something I would remember for the rest of my life. What started as a simple family dinner, punctuated by a curious refusal and veiled gestures, had led me down a path of doubt and suspicion. Yet, in the end, it had revealed truth, tenderness, and the promise of a future I hadn't fully dared to imagine. Sitting there at the table, watching her smile softly across the plates now scattered with crumbs of dessert, I reflected on how fragile trust can be. Just a single withheld word, a small secret, had the power to stir unease, to cloud affection, to make the familiar feel distant. Love, no matter how deep, can falter under the weight of fear and uncertainty, and yet it has the resilience to recover when honesty and openness are allowed to surface. Tonight had reminded me that even the closest bonds need care, attention, and patience, and that moments of doubt, though uncomfortable, can lead to deeper understanding. I lifted my glass, not with the ritual wine of past dinners, but with simple water, cool and clear, a symbol of clarity and new beginnings. She mirrored my action, our hands brushing briefly as we held our glasses aloft. Around us, the family continued their chatter, their laughter now tinged with warmth and joy. But for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of us and the life growing quietly between us. I took a sip, feeling the cold liquid settle, a reminder of the calm that comes after a storm. In that simple act, I felt hope renewed, a quiet resolve settling in my chest. The night had begun with tension and suspicion, but it ended with revelation, connection, and the bright, unspoken promise of what was to come. In that clarity, I found peace, and the certainty that together, we could face whatever the future held. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe. Our channel Awesome Visual Story.